Hello and welcome to another episode of the Canterbury Strength podcast. Today we are speaking to Matt Vine, head coach of Pegasus Weightlifting Club in Maidstone. Matt has shown us a lot of support during our journey with Canterbury Strength and has a long history of success with his own weightlifting career. We were very interested to hear more about his career and coaching methods, so grab yourself a cup of tea and we'll dive straight into the first question. Can you give us a summary of your weightlifting career?
Started many years ago. Was doing a bit of training with some other sportsmen, and this chap who did a bit of weightlifting coach persuaded me to try and get involved, and had to persuade me a little bit, but I thought I'd give it a go. Made my debut in a league match for Sittingbourne D team, and quite liked the atmosphere and everything that went through it. And so then I got involved and started training with other people and sort of worked my way into the divisional competitions and national competitions and so on. And slowly went through, ended up in the international team, and was in the international team for quite a few years. Obviously, the highlights was the going to Olympic Games in '88, really. So that was so I started in I think it was in a storeroom, a sports centre, and then, as I say, a journey through the different levels and so on, and one step at a time, nothing spectacular really, and so very lucky to go to the Olympics, which was obviously the highlight. But I was in the international team for I don't know how many years, several years.
Nothing spectacular, just an Olympics and a Commonwealth Games.
Yeah, it was but it was one of those things where it wasn't overnight success. I had to sort of do my apprenticeship, one step at a time. You do all the national competitions, and you have to, equally as important, you've got to travel around the country. And I remember my first ever national championships was in Wolverhampton, and it was a British under 23 championships, and there were four of us in my weight class, and I was ranked number 4, and the lad who was supposed to win it unfortunately hurt his leg playing football the week before, so he unfortunately didn't make much of a total. So I pinched a medal, which was that was a little spur going to national championships and sneaking a medal, which sometimes that's just what you need, just something, a little something to give you a little bit of encouragement, and then it goes from there. Oh, definitely. But you have to do your apprenticeship. You have to serve your time and do all the travelling and the one step at a time. I think that's quite important, really.
So, did you have world championships before going to things like that, or was that not a thing?
That was luckily I went to the one in 1989 in Athens. That was obviously the one following the Olympics. So sometimes those are a little bit of the morning after, the night before, hangover after the party, because not always all the top lifters are always performing. Most of them were there, but that was in Athens in 1989.
Because it was so soon after the Olympics, you mean?
Yeah, it was a year after, and a number of the top lifters had retired, and one or two were having sort of extended breaks, not doing a great deal. But it was still there was plenty of people to replace them, so that was pretty good.
So you didn't have to do world championships to qualify for the Olympics?
No, it was the qualification process. There we had a competition we used to have a competition called it was the EEC Championships way back then, and it was more or less a sort of unofficial championships. Sorry, move the phone there. It's like the unofficial championships of Western Europe, and all the EEC countries were in there. And that was one where we used, and there was a European Championships in Cardiff, of all places, prior to that as well. I always remember actually one of the lads, I was lifting in the EC Championships, and I knew I needed to sort of get a particular lift to keep pace with it all, and I missed it second snatch. And I went out for my third snatch. And it's one of the other lifters he said to me afterwards, he said, "Your face, it was just fear." That was his expression. You were over that for that third snatch, he said, and you just fear on your face. I can't miss this. Yeah, so that was the way. But it was nothing like the complicated system it is now. I mean, now it's obviously because, well, obviously the numbers have reduced, and obviously now we have ladies lifting as well. So that's there's less male places around now. But the system now, the way it works, obviously to try and include different nations as possible and so on. It's nothing as complicated as it is now to try and qualify, because obviously lots of people are going along to try and lift and so on, and it's not particularly easy to work out if they're going to qualify or not. It's much more involved nowadays, the qualification process and so on. And obviously, obviously because the things are a lot more available, the information's a lot more available, internationally, who's lifting what and so on. So, it's a lot more global, in the sense it's much more globally aware of what's going on. It was much more straightforward then, really. It was, in all those years ago. Thankfully.
Can I ask you about what the highlights have been along the way, and has there been anyone who, in particular, who's inspired you as well in your weightlifting career?
Yeah, when I look at it, I think it's the chaps who, when I first started, who were involved at ground level, who were actually putting competitions on and getting people involved, and there were several in the area, in the Kent area, and they were people because who did, when you look back at even more so, but at the time, the amount of, like, as you well know, the amount of time and effort they put in to try and develop the sport, of which you were a part of it. Obviously, you got on the sort of conveyor belt and went through. But they were ones. Things like that under 23s, just pinching a medal. At the time, I look back at that one, and I remember a competition, we had a Southeast Championship once, and it was one of those days. Thankfully, when just everything went well, the whole 6 out of 6 and whatever, and it was in the Southeast Championships, and it was a sort of satisfying feeling because you'd done the preparation, the training had all gone well, and you executed it on the day. And that was at a lower level, but it's once again, I suppose it's mental training and preparation and so on. I remember being asked to lift first time internationally was once again it was an EEC Championships, and I was in as a sort of last minute reserve because it was prior to the '84 Olympics, and a number of the lifters didn't need to qualify, wasn't going to lift, so they asked a few sort of lifters to make the numbers up basically, and we went out to Bordeaux in France. And we went out there. It was a great experience. And there was in my weight class, there was about 10 people. And I was obviously one of the first on, if not the first one on. But we had the competition, and I finished my lifts, and I went back and sat down and was watching the lifting. There were some very good lifters there. Rolf Milser was German lifter, was very, very good. And I remember sitting there watching it all, and all the audience, the French put on quite a good show. It's quite an ambience in the place, and the way they present it all. I remember looking around thinking, I quite like this. This is good. I quite like this. So thinking, I could quite happily do some more of this. So that was a little thing. So you get these little things that just push you along. You get one or two and knock you back, of course. Sometimes they're equally as important in the sort of long-term development. But there are little moments like that, and times when I think sometimes if you're lucky enough, if you've done a lot of training and all the preparation's gone well, and you do yourself justice on the day, that's quite a nice feeling. You give quite a lot. You get quite a good sense of satisfaction when that happens. So all those things are all pretty good.
Are there any important lessons that you've learned from your weightlifting days?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Because obviously there's a song, isn't there? I won't sing it for you. There's a reason. There's a song, the song. There's a reason. I forget who sings it now. But normally, if something goes wrong or whatever, there's always a reason somewhere along the line. So sometimes it's just finding out why it went wrong or whatever. Was it before you got to the competition? Was it at the competition and so on? So it's all part of the learning process, really. I think you say you've got to have these little blips along the way. Everyone does, really. Every sportsman, every weightlifter has had, obviously, ups and downs. I remember it's a good mate of mine. He's a very, very good lifter, Dean Woolley, and he was lifting in the World Championships in the early 80s in Moscow. And he said his training had gone extremely well. The build-up had been fantastic. He remembered walking out, putting chalk on his hands, walking out for his first lift, thinking, I don't feel like it today. It went disastrously wrong. You just get moments like that for whatever reason. So yeah, I think that's when you get those moments, not necessarily the disastrous moments, but ones where it didn't go quite to plan. And then I think obviously that's a little a lesson, really. Yeah, definitely.
When and how did you open Pegasus Weightlifting Club as well? Would you be able to tell us more about that?
Yeah, well, I think it was a gymnastics club. It's a highly successful gymnastics club, and they've got some of the country's outstanding gymnasts. And they were looking to branch out a little bit. They've got quite a lot of area there. They've got play areas and cafes and things. And they came up with the idea of a weights area because some of the gymnasts do use the weights, they use the weights exercises and so on. So I thought they'd sort of double it up a bit, rather obviously the gymnast using the equipment. And I thought they would try and develop that as well. There's another string to their bow type thing. And obviously sometimes it's if some of the gymnasts, they can branch into that as well if they feel that they're more their body type's more suited to weightlifting than in gymnastics and so on. So that's how it sort of came along. Really, they were looking to put another little activity there, and that's how it started 3 years ago, maybe.
Can you tell us a bit more about the work you do with the kids at Pegasus, and also work you do with school kids as well?
Yeah, it's fairly straightforward. We get the kids come along and train, and try and get them involved and so on, and try and obviously get them in quite good little social groups. Obviously, get wide ranges of ability and so on. But hopefully, I think it's like one of those things. If someone comes along, if children come along, and there's a number of other children doing it, they're more encouraged to join in. They feel more, and so on. So a lot of lifters. It amazes me. Well, we've got some of them are very young and used to lifting with young girls and so on. Very, very keen. I'm really impressed the way they are committed to it. They really are. I think sometimes it's just environment. I remember when I first started lifting, very, very good lifter in this country, they're called Gary Langford, and he was living in Oxford. And my coach at the time said, "Oh, Gary Langford's moved up to Manchester to train and so on." And I thought, is he completely mad? He's moving all the way up, But he was moving up for the training environment with his training with his other guys and the coach and so on. And that's quite important, really, to try and create an atmosphere that they quite enjoy. And also the element of, if you've got quite a good atmosphere, if someone comes in and they're new, they'll just join in with everyone else, what everyone else is doing. So that's quite important. If you just just try and pitch it about right, you've got to try and get it as if they're actually doing some training, but obviously they've got to have a little bit of social interaction and so on with one another. And the school, by the same token, the school wanted to do it as an enrichment activity, because quite a few people now, with things like CrossFit and all the gyms, so many people do train in gyms and do CrossFit and things like that. So one or two of the teachers were involved, and it went from there. It started off to do it as an enrichment lesson for some of the children, and then an after school club and so on. And as I say, there's another little weightlifting community there. And the school, very supportive of school. They like it, and we obviously try and get as many children as possible to try it out, and then from there, a certain percentage, take it up. So it's so far so good. Of course, it's all come to a grinding halt now, as it has for everybody. So it's not as if it was just us penalised. Everyone has lost the momentum for the time being. I think it's very much, if you can get them if they are doing it with other children. I think what's possibly the worst thing is if they're actually doing it on their own and people are looking at them, because that makes the situation worse. You've got to try and mix them in, merge them in, so they can just sort of come in under the radar, if it were, and just slowly they can do that, the activities. And if you can try and sort of put them with the appropriate other trainers and so on, and just try and let them come in under the radar, merge and train and so on. And obviously, once they start performing and doing the lifts, encouragement certainly helps. And then take it from there, really. But I think a lot of it, particularly with weightlifting, I was quite sure what it is when they first start. I wasn't particularly sure how it all worked. I'm sure you weren't when you first start. So they're a little bit unsure of it all. But I think that's the key part really, is if they can be in the little crowd to start with, so they can just feel their way in a little bit really. You don't want to sort of try and isolate them or anything on those. And particularly if you can get them doing some grips. Also what's helpful, because with the children, if the rubber weights, the big, the great big thick 10s, 5s and 2.5s, which are extremely wide. So obviously they're extremely light. But once again, the children, their first impression is, oh goodness me, I can't lift that, and suddenly realise they can. So straight away, those great big discs, they do help a great deal. Obviously, to us, it's just a weight. Oh, absolutely. Straight away they can do it. So I think it's one of those things. It's just one step at a time. You have to go along the lines. And by the same token, if you can find a few things they can do to start with, and just keep on doing the things they can do, rather than start asking them to do things they're not ready for. I think I remember there's a weightlifting book. Whoever gave it to me, and someone said along the lines of, the coach. I think it was a Russian book which went to Spain and it was translated back, and it was one of the lines. The coach has got to show a lot of patience. You have, as you know. So it's not crash bang wallop at all, is it?
No. It's a long learning curve, isn't it? And you have to often adjust things several times. Yeah.
It's all building trust as well. Like you've got to make sure they trust you and believe that they can do it because you give them the right encouragement.
If they do, a session where they don't miss any lift, that's quite a good feeling for them. Yeah. If they've lifted they've not missed, they've done the whole session, and then one lift, and they start getting a little bit of a positive feel then. Right? And you don't want to obviously trying to ask them to do exercises where they might miss it, they might get it. Start off with things which they can do straight away.
Well, that's incredibly important for gaining confidence, isn't it? Giving them goals that they can actually achieve, and not giving them things that they're going to necessarily find too complicated, whether that's movement or the weight, etc.
Yeah, if you don't pick something up quickly, it's very off-putting.
Can we ask you a bit about your particular coaching philosophy? How do you create the right environments for your athletes?
Yeah, there's once again, sometimes it's say if you can groups of trying. Sometimes it's just trying to coordinate the lifters and their parents. So try and find a time so you can get them all together at once. That's much better if they've got a crowded gym and much, as you know, a good atmosphere. That helps a great deal. I always remember with weightlifting. I remember the quote Leonardo da Vinci. I don't know if he was a good weightlifter or not. He was quite a strong Leonardo da Vinci. And it was simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. And I think that's very, very true in weightlifting. You're trying to simplify it. Simplify it in which way you don't want to overcomplicate it. But sometimes you're doing various exercises and so on. So you're making it as straightforward as possible. That's quite important, I think. Another thing I always remember, back from the era when I was lifted, there was a few lads who were extremely good. We go to the World Championships and things like that, and people, Andrew Davis and Dave Morgan, would win medals, which was fantastic. And I always remember talking to one of Andrew Davis's training partners. It was that lad Steve Wilson. He was actually won the under-23s, the first one I lifted in Australia. And Andy said, the thing that strikes me about Andy Davis, and Andy Davis won a silver medal at the World Championships we spoke about in 1989. And he said, the thing about Andy Davis is he's very good at the snatch and he's very good at the clean jerk. And that's quite important as well, because there's lots of assistance exercises you can do. Very, very helpful. But you must never lose sight of the fact that they don't count ultimately in competitions. I mean, I know lots of situations where somebody can get carried away with the assistance movements and get extremely good. And then you've also got to remember they are assistants helping the lifts, and ultimately you've got to be very at the lifts. There was another lad from Kent, which I remember training with years ago, a lad called Mark Groombridge. He was an international weightlifter. Mark lifted in the junior worlds, and the senior world championships and so on. He was very, very good mark. He was weighing about 100, 105 in the end. And he was very, very good at the snatch balance exercise. He was a good lifter anyway. His best for one, the snatch balance for one repetition was 200.
Oh, okay.
And I remember him doing it, and he looked like he could do more. His coach said, "Mark, no, it's no need to do any more, Mark. Now, come on, you don't keep spending hours, not hours, but." So it's one of those things where ultimately, I mean, another lifter, very successful, Dave Morgan. You might have heard about Dave Morgan. So once again, watching him train and so on, didn't spend too much time with the assistance exercises, power snatches and snatch and hangs and things like. He did them obviously, but ultimately it was the lifts that are very important, I think. So I think sometimes you say, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, do you think there's any particular assistant exercise out there at the moment that people probably pay too much attention to, or fads?
It's a difficult one. I think I don't know if there's anyone particularly. I think in some ways doing the assistance exercise, they can make a little bit of variety for training as well, which is another thing, because obviously it can be quite repetitive. So sometimes just changing around different exercises can make it slightly more interesting for the lifters and so on. I don't know if there's any exercises which maybe sort of perhaps people spend too much attention on. I don't know. I haven't seen that many, because obviously you see some of the people training sometimes. I think you can get situations where, I remember I sort of fell into this trap a little bit, where we'd have training programs. And you do the training program, but no times did you actually do the snatch or clean and jerk. It was all stuff from the hang, from the blocks and so on and whatever. And I think I've sort of stumbled across, just by accident actually, we've got some of the kids doing off the blocks, because we have these fantastic jerk block things nowadays, which we didn't have years ago. So you can use them for a safer snatch. And it just came across by accident. It seems to be slightly more effective when you're doing that, is if you alternate it with the lift itself. Because normally you do a number of sets of the blocks, and then you go and do the lift itself. But we stumbled across it, just moving the kids around. It's sometimes if you alternate, they do it from the blocks, then off the floor, then the full lift, and backwards and forwards. It tends to get more effect from it, because they can relate to it a bit more then.
Yeah.
So that was just something that came along just by accident, really. But so I think that's the key. You've got to try and make it as interesting as possible. For the lifters and so on. And we had this years ago. We had this training we were doing, which was the normal stuff with repetitions and so on. And then the sort of Bulgarian style training came along, which, as you probably know, is just based on single lifts of the lifts themselves. And that came along, and a number of us did that. And I remember thinking to people, well, it was as much of a change as anything else, really, to do something different. And as I remember, one of the coaches in our national team was sort of saying, yeah, you've got different ways of doing it. It all works. So sometimes just sort of changing it around a little bit. But I remember that particular era, Bulgarians, and they really just did the movements themselves, the snatch, clean and jerk. I remember chatting to one of the coaches who came over to Britain, and what about doing it off the blocks? Not necessary. What about not necessary? Everything I answered. What about high pieces? Not necessary. And then in the end, I went up to him and I looked at him and I said to him, "Not necessary," and he just laughed and we changed around. So there's different ways of doing it. You'll probably find that one particular world champion will do it one way, another world champion will do it another way, and so there's different ways. I don't think there's any particular way, and sometimes changing it around to make it slightly more interesting, it's not a bad thing at all. But I think that basically, if it's all solid training, it all works.
I think being aware of the different ways of doing it is really useful, especially when you are training a lot of kids, because obviously if you keep the variety up, they stay more engaged. So I suppose being aware of there being so many different ways is actually quite useful.
Yeah. Absolutely right. Yeah, absolutely, because that's one of the things to say with children. So the tough part with kids, well, the most important part and the most difficult is recruitment, is getting them in. That's by far the most difficult part, as you know. And then the next most important part is retaining them.
Mm-hmm.
because that's the next most difficult part. So you've got to try and no one is ever going to retain 100% of all the children that come in, obviously. But if you can try and keep the numbers up, the ones you retain, so that's quite important. Also, where people, as I say, come from another sport, to do weightlifting to improve the sport, and then end up realising that they quite prefer weightlifting to the sport they're doing. So I think, keeping it in the mix and keeping it high profile amongst the other activities and so on. Oh yeah, very, very important. Yeah, it's the thing with some of the gymnasts have come along. They've got a very high developed sense of coordination, because their sense of coordination has been developed from a young age. High sense of balance, so they have a massive advantage to start with. So straight away, and one or two would find the actual weightlifting movements relatively easy compared with some of the complicated movements they do for gymnastics, because obviously they've done gymnastics from an early age, and their all-round physical ability has been highly developed. Yeah. You can tell them they almost stand out like a sore thumb straight away when you see them coming out of it. It's very much, I think it's kids who are doing gymnastics, it's a good basis for probably any sport you then move on to. I mean, you probably see some of the footballers now, after they score a goal, the flip flaps they do, so they've obviously done a bit of gymnastics, right? Yeah. So they can, normally pick it up. And then the flexibility is, once again, the flexibility is normally pretty good. Not always, of course, because you've got sometimes that their body type slightly more suited to gymnastics than it is weightlifting. But once again, it's not a bad basis to start with, really.
Can we ask you as well about, this isn't on our questions, but what do you look for when you've got a new athlete coming in, either if it's a kid or young adult? Is there certain traits that you think, right, this ticks the box, for potential very good weightlifter?
No, I think sometimes you see youngsters coming in, and straight away you get an indication straight away that they look as if they could be pretty good, quite suitable and so on, and they seem quite keen. I always remember talking to a lad, Philip Colson, who runs a school in Oxford, and he always said the characteristic, the most important one for him, is if they're very keen. And I think that's very, very true. If they're very enthusiastic about it, you can tell they really want to try it, and particularly if they can do the movements quite well. I always remember it's quite a funny thing, really. Talking to this Bulgarian coach years ago, he was talking about his young junior to the Bulgarian junior team. And he always said, if you've got a young lifter who has problems sort of standing up with the weight, that's not a problem, because you can just train on the front squats, he said. But sometimes if they've got a problem doing the jerk, that can be a problem. And quite often I've done that before, seeing somebody, young lad lift, young girl lifting, and they can do the flexible bit, and they do the cleans, lovely and whatever. And I'm sometimes thinking, God, I hope they can jerk.
What's the issue that you find most common in terms of having problems with the jerk then?
Oh, sometimes it is a coordination thing, isn't it? Sometimes it's the coordination, really, of the. Some people, it's just like falling off a log, and some people some people just take it to like a duck to water. Some people, it's just the coordination of the arms going one way and the legs going another way and so on, and that type of thing. So I think it's just an individual one. And sometimes you get kids who pick it up. Well, it's like any sporting activity. They pick it up fairly quickly, and they pick up by watching the other lifters as well. That's normally quite a good one. When they're doing their sets, when they're training, when they first start, if they then are watching some of the more experienced lifters doing it as well, they're taking that in as well. So they're quite receptive to how it all goes and so on. So I think generally, if they've got quite a good attitude and they're quite enjoying it, and of course at that stage we just try and make sure that they can do the movements. Yeah. But as we all know, ultimately, it does help if they're quite strong. Because it does help. It does help. Obviously, when you're looking at them as well, that they've got everything. They're pretty coordinated. They can do the lifts quite nicely, and they're strong as well. Which is ultimately we can, because obviously at this level we're not focusing so much on it to begin with, but ultimately it does. The further they go on, the more and more it becomes important, becomes relative.
I suppose, especially because you're training quite a few kids who are in primary school as well, so the strength probably doesn't come into it as much there. It's more about
absolutely it doesn't come in. You're not too bothered about that at this stage really, and just see if they can do the movements, because obviously they grow at different rates and different speeds and so on. So yeah, at that age, you just obviously get them to do the movements. And another thing with particularly younger kids is make the training quite short. Really, you don't want it to drag on. Really, just trying to assess their. It's the thing, because we do at school. Sometimes we do an hour, and that's a bit too long sometimes for some of the kids to train for an hour. Do a few things, other activities as well, throwing some medicine balls and things like that, just a little bit of a strength thing, and sometimes something different as well. So that's another thing with the children. You can't give them hours and hours of training, because obviously another thing, of course, if you've got young lifters, if they're quite good at weightlifting, they're normally quite good at other sports as well. So you've got not in competition, but they've got other options as well. So if they get quite a good sort of a quite good vibe and quite a good feedback from lifting, then you've got that much more chance of doing it, because you get a lot of children, they will do one sport anyway. They'll do whatever sport they do. It's quite important to try and keep on with them. You do get patterns where you get young lifters who learn the movements from a young age, and then they take 6 months out. And if they've learned it from a young age, that's not a problem, because obviously when they come back, they pick it up almost straight away, because they've learned it. Like we all know our nursery rhymes, obviously, because we learned them when we were very young. And taking breaks out at that age, they can do that. It's not a problem, because they probably come back a little bit more mature, a little bit more sensible. So there's nothing wrong with that at all. I think seeing kids actually have it for 6 months. Taking 6 months, of course, with weightlifting, of course, we don't actually, like any other sport, has a season and an off season. And of course, with weightlifting, you can let's go 12 months of the year. So sometimes you do need natural breaks for the children as well, so they can recharge the batteries and so on.
Well, that's probably quite encouraging for people that are having a break at the moment because of the current situation.
Yeah, definitely. So that's a good example with weightlifting. You've got to try and make the best of a bad situation, turn it around as a positive, from a negative situation. You're getting something out of it.
This is probably very, very individual, but when do you think the right time is to go from a score-based competition assessment to just assessing the weight that they're lifting? Sometimes, obviously, it's good to have maybe both going on at the same time, but
absolutely. Because we do that, obviously, we do with the children, the technique based. It's quite funny. We had a competition when I think you guys came along and lifted, and we had some of our adult lifters lifting for the first time as well. And they actually said to me, they thought they were going to just be marked on technique as well. So I said, no, that's just for the kids, because the British weightlifting, the official under 10s and under 12s, it's more what they lift, and then there's little bonus points for the technique, which is fine. And then thereafter, once they go into the under 15s, it's just pure weightlifting. But I think obviously there's no harm in holding them back a little bit, just to do pure technique competitions. No harm whatsoever. And the weights start drifting up, because quite often they can perform the lifts better with a little bit of resistance on the bar. Not excessive, obviously, but obviously once they get a little bit of resistance, they can make the movements that much better. But I think the not a problem. We have the situation, we have under 10s and under 12s, that's fine. And of course, the next jump is under 15s. It's quite a big jump. So quite often you get children who are sort of finished with under 12s, and suddenly it's a big jump. So quite often, finding with kids that if they're doing the sport and so on, they can go along to national championships, and that's a great way of giving them a great feeling about the sport if they're going along, particularly if they're staying away from home, or they're staying overnight and so on. It's a great experience for them all. And suddenly, from 13, they hit 13, and the qualification standards are based for 15-year-olds. Years ago, we used to the system was there was separate year groups: under 12s, under 13s, under 13s, under 14s, under 15s. So you had a separate one for individuals and so on. So that would make things a little bit easier, having those competitions, because that's once again, if you've got a kid who's pretty good and they're involved with national competition, there's a lot more chance they're going to stick with the sport if they're doing particularly well. But yeah, I think definitely, I think maybe it's you could say the first, if they're fairly young, the first 2 years just do technique competitions. I think that's not a bad yardstick. I think you've got to gauge the individuals and so on. But then if they do lift in the national things, the national under 10s, under 12s, there again, you can just do the lifts. You haven't got to just follow along. You haven't got to necessarily get involved with how much weight they're going to lift. Just once again, try and repeat that on the stage. And once again, that situation with children, if waving that magic wand, if for 2 years they missed the lifting competition, that's a great confidence builder over the years, because they will associate competitions with good lifts. And I think also if you went on to national competitions as well, particularly if you just said, well, actually, we're just going to get going, try and get 6 out of 6. We'll keep the weight quite light. Long term, they're going to have that. They have no fear of competitions, because they're only ever going to associate it with doing good lifts. So I think you, once again, that patience with them and so on. Obviously, a few of the children want to push it a little bit, and naturally enough, because when it starts getting to a certain age, and particularly when they go along to, say, the under 15s, and they're in competitions and so on, everyone else is doing it. And I think maybe if you've got a child, the first couple of years technique, and then try and do a combination of the two, phase them in like that, I think.
Well, we've seen, firsthand this work, the way you focus on technique work really well, because we've seen how quickly, your lifters are dropping underweight in previous years at competitions. We've seen them do the technique, and then they transfer that over to the heavier weight later. It's obvious how beneficial it is.
Yeah, definitely.
And it's something that we are focusing on more at our club now.
Especially with at our last competition, when we had that group of kids who were all from primary school, and their technique's fantastic, because you've taught them that they have to focus on technique before anything else.
Yeah. It's drop speed.
Yeah,
amazing.
Getting under it.
Honestly.
I think, I'd say, particularly if there's a group of them doing it as well, that helps greatly. If they're there, they don't feel isolated. If you've got a situation, you've got one child's going to be doing it on his own. If they're all doing it together, they accept that as the normal, really.
Yeah.
And then that's fine. Yeah, but it is quite. It's a very good way of doing it, really. I think the national standard is out of 4, 1 to 4, but we do our own little one and make it from 1 to 6, so you can do it. And it's quite good, encouraging, really, because the parents quite often they want to come along and see what score their child's got. They're not looking to see what the weight was. They're looking to see, which is natural enough. Parents want to see how their kids are doing and so on. And they're looking at and the parents themselves are looking at the score. And I do say on some occasions, though, I've said once before when I'm sort of addressing the parents and saying, don't look into it too deeply, the scores. It's there as a way of give some sort of means to relate to. Don't look in. If someone said, he got 51 last time, he got 53. But don't look into it too deeply. It's there to try and encourage them to just work on.
It's absolutely like a pointer, isn't it? A pointer. Well, actually, if he focused on this, he would have got the points, or she would have done better on that lift.
If you're lucky enough to build that where the kids are, once again, they know before the start they're going to get all their lifts in. Yeah. Because obviously this weight's well within their scope. Once again, it gives them they'll focus that a little bit more. So that's not so bad. But yeah, it's quite as you say, quite like it, because there's not much pressure there's less pressure on them to actually perform.
I think was probably why it's really good that obviously over the past couple of years both of our clubs have been having local level competitions, and it means that they actually get to try out a competition before they have to go to a national level one. And I actually had a question. One of my questions in the list was about like why is it that you encourage your lifters to do competitions right from the beginning? And I guess everything we've just said covers it. It's just it's a confidence boost. And
I think so. And also, kids are coming into the sport, and you want to try and encourage them, and you want to try and capture their imagination. So if you've seen we've had kids lifting just like a 1 kilo bar. What we've had situations where you get kids come along and say after 6 weeks do that, then they see the whole package and they're quite impressed because they've seen they've seen the preparation, they see what it's all about, because ultimately, once again, they do the training but they don't really know how competitions work or what's expected of them. So if you can try and impress them to start with, then they've got you always get there's only one chance to make that first impression. So if they get a great impression about it, a good experience from it.
I suppose like your competition in Bordeaux that made you decide to stick with competitions.
Yes, that one I'm thinking, oh, this isn't too bad here actually. Yeah, absolutely right. Yeah. I did go, but it's quite funny. It was in Bordeaux, and I thought I'd go and get myself some black currant juice. I was queuing up. They were serving this black currant juice because I was exhausted, and I got myself a little plastic cup of black currant juice and drank. It was red wine because I was that was after the competition. So yeah, I did a bit of shock. I was willing to rehydrate, and being in Bordeaux, they were serving up red wine by the.
Next question: how has weightlifting changed throughout your career, both nationally and internationally?
The major, obviously, is girls taking part now, ladies taking part. That's the most significant part, because when I started years ago, it was male only, and it was unusual if you got a lady referee. That was people used to comment on that. We had a lady referee, goodness me. And obviously, with the ladies coming into it now, that's changed it massively. And I don't think anybody predicted how big it would get, ladies lifting, and how good they would be, and so on. No one predicted how good it would be. They always thought it was going to be in the shadows, but now there's probably more lady weightlifters, and that's the most significant thing I think with weightlifting, nationally and locally and so on. Nationally, when I was involved, it was internationally rather. It was a 2-horse race. The Russian team and the Bulgarian team, and they were way in front of everybody else. Now it's much more global. I mean, I think the IWF made big efforts to try and get it around the world, which they've done. And you say now the medals are spread all around the world. When I was involved, internationally, all the major competitions, it was Eastern Europe won them all basically, and I think the Bulgarians could quite easily win the first 4 or 5 weight classes, and the Russians would win the next 4 or 5 weight classes. They dominated the whole thing. But now, as you say, as we know now, is Colombia, Venezuela, China, and so on, all these different countries and so on. So, and I think also on the Commonwealth Games and things like that now, there are big efforts now to get all the Pacific Islands and Gibraltar and get all these people. So it's a lot more global, which is obviously much better for the sport. Obviously, if everything's spread around the world, very good. And then sort of nationally, locally, well, not so many clubs nowadays. It's changed. Years ago when I started, there was lots of weightlifting clubs and lots of weightlifting leagues, and a variety of reasons why. A lot of weightlifting clubs, you still had a lot of people training there to sort of make the numbers up and so on. And of course, then the sort of David Lloyd style clubs came along, and you lost the numbers of people doing it. Local authorities not quite so sympathetic these days. Years ago, they would be quite chuffed if someone would start an activity up in a youth club or something, but nowadays it's a lot more accountable. They want to rent, almost want a commercial rent if someone wants to do it. So those weightlifting clubs, as we knew them, maybe 6 in Kent, there were 6, and all produced some, very, very good clubs, a wide range of lifters. And that was really what brought the sort of decline of it. And I remember one of the chaps who ran the Southeast weightlifting for a long, long time. He was running the Southeast Championships over Westmoreland Way, and he sent me the newsletter out, and I read the report. And there was only, from having like 60 or 70 in the Southeast was Kent, Sussex, and Surrey. Men's championships, You could easily have 60 or 70 lifters. In the 75 kg class, there'd be about 10 or a dozen lifters, no problem at all. And this particular championship, there was maybe just like a dozen lifters in total. And his words were, thanks to everyone for keeping the game going, because it really, really went down. But then of course it's sort of re-emerged. CrossFit has made people a lot more aware now, and you've got a lot more gyms catching on there. And also you've got lots more students with all the various universities things you can do now, the strength and conditioning, the sports science, and that type of thing. So there's a lot more aware. So we've got a big influx of people doing it at student level now, because obviously it's highlighted there, and adults and CrossFit and so on. And so that's the difference, really. I think the way to keep it all in balance, really, to keep the children going, really is, because I remember British tennis donkeys years ago. British tennis, this was years ago, British tennis was at a very low ebb, and it was a bit embarrassing with the Wimbledon Championships, because maybe someone got past the first round. It was, made the news. Someone won a match. How do we raise the standard of tennis? And the chap came back and said, well, that's easy. You just get more kids playing. The question is, how do you get more kids playing? And it's very much like, how do we get more kids playing? How do we get more kids involved? Once again, well, you think of an area where there's loads of kids, well, that's a school. So the question really is, how do we get more schools involved? Because I think that's probably an area which now, to link in with the other ways weightlifting is involved, university level and CrossFit and so on. Schools is perfect, because obviously now lots of children will go into those sort of industries. They go to college and they're trying to be personal trainers and things like that. So it's an element of career activity to it as well. So I think that's the way forward. Maybe the clubs as we knew them, and the weightlifting leagues. I thought about weightlifting leagues and running it past a few people. They sort of said, no, I don't think it will work now, which maybe it does. We tend to have these opens, which are very good. I think we were sort of involving more schools. I've got a few contacts. You're doing it, we're doing it, and we're looking at school matches and so on. So that would be a definite way forward. And of course, the schools, they see the benefits of it as well. It's another string to their bow, another activity, and so on. And so, and quite often you have numbers of teachers who do the gym, do CrossFit, so they're a little bit tuned into it as well. So I think that's a way we've got just open up those gateways a little bit, develop those links with schools and so on. I think that would then get it all back to, as it were, different landscape, different style. But I think that's the way it would go. I mean, it's changed. Like all sports, has it ebbs and flows. Sometimes it's highly popular, and other times it's not so. I mean, as a kid, you couldn't get a squash court for love nor money way back then. I mean, it was just absolute. But now there's very few squash courts have been knocked down. So a lot of these sports, they do go ups and downs and so on. But I think that's possibly the way forward. And obviously, as we mentioned before, because what's going on now, the whole thing has come to a bit of a grinding halt, same as everybody. But we were sort of on the verge of getting a few more people involved and so on, and a few more schools. And I think once that happens, you just once someone comes along and gets involved, it's just getting someone to come along and a starting point. That's all you need, just a starting point. And particularly you come along, and then if they've got a starting point, then they know they're moving forward and they get some momentum going. It's all quite exciting as well.
Well, like you said, just before the lockdown, we were discussing about inter-schools and having a small open league and things. So hopefully, when everything's back up and running, we can make a start.
Yeah. I think that was the way it was going. I think with the schools, our schools, people, you can actually then show them the blueprint. This is how it works. This is what's involved, and so on. And it's not as if you're going to try something completely new that no one's got any idea how it's all going to work out. You show them what goes on and how it all works and so on. So I think it's to say, it's just getting that, just putting that first McDonald's burger store in, isn't it? That's all you do. You get the first one.
Yeah, once we've had the first one, it should all be easy to promote and get things up and running.
I remember going way back, Kent schools weightlifting, just boys only, 60 boys, 60 kids. So it's going back quite a few years now, and once again a wide range of ability. So that's what it was before. I don't see well, no, there's no reason why you can't start. Also, particularly now we've got the girls doing it as well. And it's quite strange that as you talk to people, we're talking about the promotional video, but still, I'm sure 99% of the people don't realise ladies do weightlifting, and they still also don't realise children do weightlifting. So it's still a little bit of a mystery sport for a number of people. But yeah, it's nothing like blowing our own trumpet a little bit.
So tricky with the the kids and the women. There's so many misconceptions still going around, which I think has been going around for 20, 30 years now. Like it's going to stunt growth and it's going to make women bulky. I still hear that. And
absolutely, all sorts of conceptions about it all. But I think obviously nowadays that generally speaking, is obviously people are more aware of people who do gym and so on, are aware of the benefits of it rather than the downside of it all. So yeah, it's just, I think once people get involved, it's just making them. It's a sleeping giant. I've always thought of that with weightlifting. Once it gets going, we get some momentum going.
Especially with the applications to other sports.
Yeah, definitely.
And now with sort of social media, if anybody's following like top athletes from other sports, you'll see on their Instagram like their training is weightlifting.
Well, they're using certainly parts
we
of
do
it.
actually, when the children come along, if you've got the big weights and the light bar, and they can do a clean and jerk the first time, we straight away say, "What? Get your friend to film you on your phone, and you can show everybody." And within seconds, obviously, they send it off, and they get feedback from their friends. So once again, you've got to embrace the new culture of the social media. Absolutely right. You've got to embrace it and got to link into it really. So straight away, with the weights and so on, it looks quite impressive when people first do it. And once again, for their own self-esteem and for their own sort of confidence and so on, that does no end of good.
Okay, so if you could summarise what are your aims and plans for the future of the club, so for the future of Pegasus.
Well, I think what would be nice is, it's strange. I thought years ago we used to have a Kent Championships, and I know in Maidstone, some of the local councils are very keen to let us have the local sports centres and so on. We might not be able to make a championships just yet. Having said that, Kent goes right up to Dartford and North Kent, Dartford and Crayford, and there's a club up there, Europa, that's quite good, I'm told.
Apparently.
Yeah, so I'm told it's quite good apparently. They would have a number of lifters, so maybe it might be just a Kent Open, because generally in most weightlifting clubs every year they would put on a reasonably big competition. So I think a Kent Open, perhaps with the Kent Championships within it, that would be a good focal point, because I think every club, every lifter, if you've got a competition to work to, because I'm sure yourself, you'd have a number of people in it, and you'd have masses of spectators would want to come along. And so I think we could do with that now, trying to put together a competition, and particularly if you could get some of the CrossFitters who they're actually affiliated or to British weightlifting, get them as well to lift locally. I think that would be quite a good point. Years ago, before I started lifting actually, in the Isle of Thanet, they used to have dinner matches, in the sense that it would be, they'd have there's a chap called Frank DeConnick, from Belgium originally, and they would you have a team from Belgium and a team from sort of Kent, the southern England, and it would be done with an evening dinner, like boxing type thing, where you'd have the snatch, the clean and press, then they serve the starters course, and then they do the snatch, then they serve the main course. And I remember explaining it to one of the mums. She said, "That sounds very civilized." She said, "You sit around and have dinner, and then you have the dessert, and then you watch the clean and jerk to finish." And that was in a time when there was no limit on time, how long you could take. So quite often Frank DeConnick would go around to say to somebody, "Look, can you go out and do your lift, please? Because we're waiting to serve the next course." So that was way back in the 1960s. They used to have and I know several people who lifted, and I know several people who went along to watch, and they sit down, have dinner, and watch the weightlifting and so on. So I think I think that would be quite a good way of getting everyone together if we could have
That'd be amazing.
a Kent Open or Kent Championships or something along those lines, and you could pull a few people in and so on to. It will give us a sort of a focal point each year, a big competition. But I remember when I was lifting, they had locally the Southeast. That was the big one coming up, the Southeast Championships, and all the club lifters and all the lifters and so on. Everyone was preparing. That was the major one, the Southeast Championships, and that was. And after was after the Southeast, back in the gym the next week, it was as flat as a pancake because everyone had done everything on the day in the Southeast. So I think that would be quite good if we could establish establish a competition, a very good, well-attended competition. That would just benefit everybody, I think.
Do you think we should have perhaps something going on more than once a year, though? I know we have our locals, but
I thought about possible weightlifting leagues, whether that would quite work. It worked brilliantly when I started lifting. I mean, in things like London, there were 6 divisions in the London League. When I was involved, they used to do it there were 2 ways. You could do it either on the Sinclair, and you just add all the totals up, 3 against 3 or 2 against 2, or sometimes before then they to work the Sinclair out there's no calculators, so there was no things like that, so it was too complicated to work out. They just did it on body weight allowance. You just obviously weighed everyone in, and then the lighter team got a certain amount of weight added onto their total. That was how that worked, league matches and so on. And then sometimes they did it 1-to-1, one lifter against one lifter. But normally it's a team event, the combinations of the lifts together. I know one of the national coaches, John Lear, from way back, he lived at Boreham Wood, and they weren't strictly in the London League, but they really pushed and they had some influence to see if they could get in Division 6 of the London League, and they weren't thinking they could do it. But then suddenly it got back. They were in the London League. And he said, we couldn't believe it. We were in the London Weightlifting League, Division 6 of the London Weightlifting League. We were just elated at the club of Boreham Wood because they were just slightly outside, but they got into the London Weightlifting League. And we had it the Southeast League when I started as well. But whether that would work or not, it may do. It might be worth a try maybe, just to see, just to establish some sort of competition basis, really. Yeah, so that's a possibility, that type of thing. And particularly for children, because I think we have got some competitions in the Southeast, and I think they are open, but there is a section for youth lifters, and that's not particularly user friendly because it's really, you've got to be over 12 and under 17, and obviously if you've got a 12 or 13-year-old, you don't really want to be up against 17-year-olds, really, do you? That's not really a level playing field at all. So I think we could, particularly with youth competitions and so on. I think with the seniors, they have the opens and the London Opens and things, and the ones at Crystal Palace, which are absolutely superb. It's done so much to that weightlifting. It's unbelievable. Really, really good. Our lifters have been going to them for years, and really, it's been so good. So maybe something along those lines, but for kids, a few dates, and particularly if we could get a number of clubs to host it differently, different venues. That spices up things no end. If it's a different venue, different coaches, different referees, it makes it a little bit more interesting for them, I think. So that would really help dramatically if we had a sort of kids open down this part of the world. So I think that's, as I say, I think everything's moving in the right direction. Unfortunately, we've had this dreadful situation. But it's the same for everybody, unfortunately. So
thank you so much.
Yeah, sorry for taking up your
incredibly
Sunday.
valuable.
It's my absolute pleasure. Thank you very much indeed.
And that's all for us today. Thank you for watching. We hope you've enjoyed it. And that's goodbye from Team Canterbury Strength.